We're here today with Caroline Leavitt, who is the New York Times best-selling author of 12 novels, some of which have been optioned for film, translated into other languages, and condensed into magazines. Her essays, articles, stories, and book reviews have appeared in Salon, Psychology Today, the New York Times Sunday Book Review, and their Modern Love series, Publishers Weekly, People, the San Francisco Chronicle, and many more publications. She's also a screenwriter, a manuscript developer, and teaches novel writing online at Stanford and UCLA. And most recently, she's part of the dynamic duo, and I know there's a bigger team behind what you're doing, A Mighty Blaze. I know our listeners are very familiar with A Mighty Blaze and the great work that you all are doing to help authors get their books out during this time of pandemic. We're here today to talk with Caroline about her new novel, With or Without You, which just came out earlier this month from Algonquin and is blazing trails everywhere. It's the story of a woman who remembers everything about having been in a coma. And it's kind of the opposite of an earlier novel of Caroline's called Coming Back to Me, which was about a woman who was in a coma who remembered nothing, which was reflective of Caroline's own experience of being in a medically induced coma. So Caroline, we're so thrilled to talk with you today, and we want to thank you for making the time to be with us here today.
Oh, of course. I love the book Cougars, and I'm just honored to be here again and excited and thrilled. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. You know, Chris and I were talking before we got on mic, and I was trying to remember where I first met you at a Booktopia, and I couldn't remember where it was. Do you remember which
Bellingham.
Booktopia? Bellingham. That was my guess. Okay.
Bellingham. Yeah.
Okay.
It was when I loved Booktopia. That was so much fun.
It was really fun. That's the first time I met you. Okay, because I've also had the pleasure of seeing you speak at the Newburyport Literary Festival as well.
Right, that's right.
Yeah, so thank you so much for being here with your new book. I loved the book. I'm not alone. It's garnering incredible praise from all the big guns, so congratulations.
Thank you.
As Chris mentioned, you yourself were in a coma, a little bit different than the character in this book in the sense that it was a medically induced coma, whereas this young woman falls into a coma in a different way. Can you talk about, if you don't mind, your own experience and why you're revisiting the world of a coma again?
It's sort of interesting to me. I mean, I was put in an induced coma for 2 or 3 weeks, like 20 years ago, after the birth of my son. I just developed this very mysterious blood disorder, and nobody knew what it was. And I was at NYU Medical Center, and they didn't know what to do, and they just thought I was dying. So they put me in this coma, and they gave me this thing, which I never heard of, called memory blockers, where I think it makes you more docile when they want to do these procedures, or maybe they just didn't want me to remember anything. But when I woke up, what happened was that I couldn't remember anything. The last thing I remembered was getting ready to go home with my baby, and then all of a sudden here I was in this hospital bed, and it was like a TV show with all these doctors around me saying, "Do you know who you are? Do you know what day it is?" And I kept thinking, this is really strange. And the thing was that anyone who had been with me, like my husband, my friends, my family, they didn't want to tell me what had gone on because they were so traumatized, which made me more traumatized. So there I was. I couldn't remember anything, but my body remembered. And I would have these terrible post-traumatic shock triggers. I would smell something and I would go in a panic attack. And somebody would tell me, "Oh, that's the lotion that the hospital used." Or I would see a color, the stripes on the hospital curtains, and those would make me really panicky. So by the time I got home, it was like I was in the hospital 3 months, and I had to stay in bed for another 3 months, and it took a total of a year before I was well. And I still had these triggers. So I went to talk to a therapist, and the therapist said, "Well, while you're a writer, why don't you write about it and you'll make sense of it?" And I thought, "Oh, that's a good idea." So I wrote this book, and it was just, like a woman like me has a baby, goes into this coma, memory blockers, all this kind of stuff. And it was sort of a dark book. And I thought I would feel better, but I didn't. And I thought, oh, that's really strange. So I just put it aside for years and years and years. And then in the last 5 years, I still was having a lot of these triggers and I just got really tired of it. So I went to another therapist and said, I don't know what to do about this, but this has to stop. I couldn't go to sleep. I was always afraid. My husband went to Norway to do this journalist thing. And the whole week he was away, I kept all the lights in my house on and I watched movies from 10 o'clock at night until 6 o'clock in the morning because I was afraid to go to sleep in the dark. So this new therapist said, oh, well, you probably wrote the wrong book. You don't want to write a book about somebody who had your experience. You want to create new memories. And she said, you can consider it like hypnosis. If you take a match and you put it to somebody's skin and you say, oh, the match is on flame, their skin will blister up. Your brain doesn't really know the difference. She said, why don't you try to write a novel about somebody who's different, whose experience is totally different from yours? And I thought, okay, I can do that. So my plan was to, write about a woman who remembered everything. Before I did that, I wanted to research just what I could have her do. So I contacted this guy, Joseph Clark at the University of Cincinnati, who does coma research. And I said, well, what can happen? And he got really excited. And he said, anything you want. And he said, in coma, your brain just sort of like it rewires and refires. And he started telling me these amazing stories of people who would wake up, and one woman was speaking fluent Mandarin, and she had nobody in her background who was Mandarin or could speak that. Another guy woke up and all of a sudden he was a virtuoso on the violin and he was playing in Carnegie Hall. And one of my favorite stories was one guy woke up and he was sure he was the actor Matthew McConaughey, and they could not disabuse him of that. He kept saying, get me my agent, call my agent, where's my script? They kept showing him a mirror, and what he saw was Matthew McConaughey.
Wow.
It took him 6 months to realize that he was not. And I thought,
did they finally bring Matthew McConaughey into the room and be like, dude, this is Matthew McConaughey?
They couldn't get him. So I thought, as soon as I heard that, instead of this dark, deep book about, I have to revisit like home again, it was this, I felt this lightness, like, oh, this is really full of wonder. And I kept talking to this guy and saying, well, could she wake up and have healing abilities? And he said, yeah, who knows? He said, who knows where any of this stuff comes from? He said, the brain is this miraculous thing and you can do whatever you want. And I thought, oh, this really frees me up. So I created this woman, Stella, and I began to write her in the coma what I thought it might be like. And the more I wrote, the better I felt. And I gave her a talent, and that made me really happy. And the odd thing was, when I finished the book, I said to my husband, it's this really weird thing. I've written this book about a coma, and it's just filling me with wonder. Instead of this dark tragedy, I feel like, oh, this is really great. And it made me feel happier and I felt better. The only thing left now of my post-traumatic stuff is I still don't really love going to sleep, but I can. I will. There's just that initial minute, and I understand like where the trauma comes from, but now I feel like, well, I lived through it again, and this time in a much happier way, and that healed me. That just healed me. Yeah, the brain is so fascinating, and the science behind it is just incredible.
Wow, I thought that was just kind of Hollywood stuff about, people waking up and maybe being able to speak Mandarin or having these, special talents. That's amazing to hear, and I think it's fantastic that this, the healing powers of writing.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly, the healing power. Yeah, you become I became another person. I mean, that was the gift that creating Stella did for me, where I was really able to heal through writing her, and in a very happy way.
It's interesting because that reminds me of the character Libby, and I wanted to talk about Libby, where she also had a life-altering experience as a child. And I don't want to do any spoilers as we're talking about this, but the experience really informed her future and who she decided to become and the path that she forged in her life. And by going through Stella's experience with her and just, growing into an adult, she faced her past. And really, to me, that character was about how, we think we can run from experiences, but they manifest themselves inside of us. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. The other thing about, I truly believe that so much that goes on in our childhoods really impacts us in ways we can't imagine. And for Libby, she did have this traumatic experience as a child, but she had a misconception about it. She believed something about it that wasn't true, and it shaped her life completely and made her into a certain type of person who was very tentative about loving anybody, and very tentative about like what was the right thing to do and how she should live her life. And again, it wasn't until she went back and sort of faced what had happened that she realized, oh my God, I was totally wrong about this, and I've carried this through my whole life, and I'm not that person. So in a way, it sort of like plays off the coma where she wasn't that person, and suddenly she had the chance to be a different person because she had a different realization. And I think everybody does that. I mean, our childhoods can really screw us up and give us all these kinds of misconceptions about what kind of person you are, and all these messages. And if you think about it and you start to realize, oh, that isn't true, you actually can trigger and rewire things in your brain and become a little bit different. And so to me, Libby was like so interesting to write because when I started writing her, I didn't really know what her deal was or what was going to happen. And so I was just writing her backstory. And as soon as I wrote her childhood, I thought, oh, now I know. And she's going to not, because as a child, you just take in whatever you're told as the truth. And I just found that really interesting too. I truly believe that people can change. And now that I know a little bit about brain chemistry, I know that you can have these fundamental, deep changes. And it does take some work, and sometimes it takes a little bit of pain, but the rewards are incredible.
Yeah. You've written so much on such a variety of topics, and I saw on Twitter that you're now a columnist for Psychology Today.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about your writing on psychological topics?